I am the moderator of the third session, but before I introduce the presenters, may I first acknowledge our KS 101 students who have joined this symposium with their poster presentations. Where are the KS 101 students? So, please find time to interact with them later after this session. Now for the introduction of the speakers. Our first speaker is Professor FRANKL from Yonsei University, and his paper is entitled The Master's Duty, Tourism Quantitative of Asymmetrical Japanese Colonial Policies in Yi-san's Miscellaneous Writings by Lamplight. The next one is actually a recording, but he will be with us on Zoom, is Professor Andrew Sang-Yu Lee of the University of Pittsburgh, and his paper is entitled Subversive Gaze in Whispering Corridors, 1998. Last but not the least is a colleague from the UP Diliman Department of Philosophy, Ingrid May H. De Jesus, and her paper is The Importance of Han Kang's The Vegetarian as a Piece of Feminist Literature, Reading Korean Literature through a philosophical lens. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let us listen to the first speaker, Professor FRANKL.
How do I tell you? First of all, thank you to Professor Pei and all the organizers for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. It is my first time presenting on Korean studies in the Philippines, so this is wonderful. Korean studies is growing. I'm assuming I have 20 minutes?
Yes.
Can you tell me when I have 5 minutes? I very much dislike people who go over time, so I will say strictly to 20 minutes. And I don't have a laser pointer, and the screens are divided, so I'm sorry. When I point over, I'll try to equal my time on both screens so as not to disadvantage any of the viewers and listeners. Good. So I'll start. I don't think I need the microphone. If you can't hear me back, let me know. I'll start with a brief. I'll go fast. I'm going to skip a lot of slides. This could be 20 minutes. It could be 2 hours. I have a lot of information, so I'll try to skip some of the slides. I realize this is a non-specialized audience. Can you all hear me fine?
Yes.
I'm pretty loud. And I don't mean non-specialized because you're all here because you're interested in Korean studies, but my focus is on a very narrow author, a very narrow time period. So it's someone who was actually born just after the Japanese colonization of Korea, only a couple weeks. So he was born Kim Hae-kyung, that's his real name. Isang is his pen name as an artist. He was born into a Japanese colony. In 1912, when he was only 2 years old, he was actually adopted by his uncle. And he was raised by his uncle who had more money than his father. His father and mother were very poor. They recognized that he was quite intelligent and they wanted to give him more opportunities for education. And so his uncle, who is his father's older brother, was quite wealthy and adopted him. Next. He goes to some of the top Korean schools. These are under Japanese, the Japanese colonial period, but there are still Korean schools in operation. And so he goes to some of the top Korean schools. The first record that we find is that he was fond of drawing. And although I'll be talking about his essays today, he was a very accomplished painter, a very accomplished ink illustrator, and his formal education and training was architecture, which obviously also has something to do with drawing, at least technical drawing. And then he enters Mungang School, which the next slide. Hosung Normal High School is a lot of sort of later elite and later famous Koreans attended. A lot of his friends at the time went on to be famous in their own respective disciplines. Next. At 14 years old, he begins to pursue art seriously. Not writing yet, this is painting. So he has oil painting that is selected for the school career exhibition. And then this is a student picture, the typical Japanese uniform, the navy blue uniform. It's black and white. You can see the next same uniform. He's obviously in an art studio, oil painting. That's next. And he finally goes to Heijo Industrial High School. This is now a Japanese government school for the first time. And he enters, basically, if all of you know the Korean education system now, this is the precursor of Seoul National University's architecture department. So he enters the architecture department, engineering, College of Engineering. It would be the College of Engineering, and inside the College of Engineering, there is an architecture department. So he's formally trained as an architect. Now there's something interesting I want to talk about with the Korea-Japan relationship. I know the Philippines also has its own complicated relationship with Japan, so you can empathize. There are only 2 Koreans in this class out of, you see there's 16, so 14 Japanese students, because it's a Japanese government school, 2 Koreans. So there's obviously some discrimination about who can enter this school. However, the Japanese, for all of their less than ideal practices, kept very meticulous records. And so all of the grades are recorded. And Isang was ranked number 1. You know, Japan, Korea, I'm not sure about the Philippines. Everything is vertical. There's number 1, there's number 2, there's number 3. There's no sharing number 1 or sharing number 3, right? Everything's very vertical. And it's very clear that Isang was the first in his class. And because of this, you can go next. There he is again. You see some painting, different sculpture figures. He's in his artist's coat, right? This would be where he's. High school here was more like undergraduate, college back then. Yeah. So here he is as basically a young college student. And the next one, yeah, close up. Next. This is Isang having to do the military training under the Japanese. So he was doing all of the typical things that Koreans were forced to do, even though he was temperamentally more an artist. Next, yeah, this is him with his rifle and training. Next, graduation court. So he would be about 19 years old. Yeah. And next, good. So I'll talk about this in a second. So he graduated number 1 in his class, and he was immediately recruited by the Japanese government general to work in their architecture department, and he went to work in their architecture department. So he was not, I don't think he was, fond of Japan or a Japanese collaborator, but he was more interested in his own personal academic and professional development than in politics. The name Isang, very quickly, it can have many meanings in Korean. There were different stories about how he became Isang. The one I first learned was his Japanese teachers in high school or university. They didn't remember. There's 2 Koreans, right? And they don't remember if his last name is Kim or if it's Lee. And he thought maybe it's E, so he said Isang, like Mr. Lee. And Isang thought that Kim Il-kyung thought that was funny, so he changed his pen name to Isang. But now, that was the old story. More recently, one of his friends, young friends, said in middle school, because he was such a painter and a drawer, he gave him a box. Because Isang, his name literally means plum wood, a plum tree, and box. And he said, I gave him as a gift a plum wood box to put his pens and brushes in, and he liked it so much that he changed his name to Isang. I don't think either one can really be proven. Next. This is him in a sketch. He wrote this to his friend on his wedding, saying that he's basically, a wedding is like a manga, right? It's a comic book. And your life is now turning into a manga. Yeah. Next. This is linguistic. Next. So he graduates. I was mistaken. He was 18 when he graduated. He starts working for Japan. His first poems that he publishes are actually in Japanese. And they're not in a literary journal, they're in an architectural journal. So Joseon Kritiku is just Joseon, Korea, and architecture. That's the first place that he actually publishes poetry. And next, there he is as an architect, right? So now you can see he's doing architecture for the Japanese government. Next. This is his cover design. So this is Josen Tenchiku, and he won first place for this design as well. This was the third edition of this magazine, and he's on first place. So again, he graduated #1 in his college, high school college. He got first place for this. So there was this weird meritocracy at the top, but I think there was some discrimination about who could get to the top. And then he starts to write. So he moves beyond art and architecture, and he begins to write. First, poetry, like I said, then fiction. December 12th, when he's 19 years old, it's a full-length novel, all in Korean. So his first poems were in Japanese, his first fiction was in Korean. The next. So, next, this is very technical. He does a lot of self-portraits. This is him, like a self-portrait that he drew, and another. No, this is actually, this is PKSS. This is E's ink drawing of his friend, who is also a novelist. And then goes up next. Here he is. If you read Isang's essays, he often is very self-deprecating about how ugly he is, about how messy his hair is, about how emaciated he is. But when I look at him, he's actually quite handsome and looks healthy. So if you do, look at the next. He's very happy next. Yeah, here he is looking very stylish. This resolution is bad. I'm sorry. Next. So I think what happens is, at the end of his life, he's dying of tuberculosis, and so then maybe he was actually very skinny. But in these earlier photos, he doesn't look like that at all. So in 1932, when he's basically 22 years old, his uncle, who he has been calling father, dies, and Isang goes back to his real home with his real parents for the first time in 20 years. In 1933, 1 year later, he's coughing up blood. His tuberculosis is quite serious. Next. Let's go to next. This is very, how much time do we have?
10 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to go a little fast because I haven't gotten to the title yet, and you're all wondering, what does this have to do with your title? But I just want you to know who Isang is and why it's important that we understand. He's not just a poet or an author or a fiction writer. He actually wrote essays, which are very important. So next. This was the house he lived in, which has been turned into a cafe. Next. Here he is at a publishing company with his friends. Next. He looks very handsome to me. Maybe I'm not misleading. Next. Here it is again. Next. Another self-portrait. He was very fond of drawing himself. Next. This is Isang with his friend who was very short and had like a hunchback. And they're walking around Seoul. So Isang do this. Next. His health continues to decline. But in 1934, so he's 24 years old, he dies at 27 years old. He dies of AIDS. So it's only 3 years before his death that he begins to write essays. And I am primarily interested in his essays. His poetry and his fiction are very experimental, and they're wonderful, but they're not. It's just my personality. I'm more attracted to the essays. They give a lot of information about what was happening in the mid-1930s in Seoul, and to a lesser degree in the provinces and in Tokyo. So next, these are his illustrations of his own work. And next, this is his own work. And next, also his, and then Park Tae-won, go back. These are illustrations of Park Tae-won, his friend, also novelist. Next, Park Tae-won, yes, next. Good. So he travels for only the second. He was born in Seoul. He was very much part of the city. He didn't like the countryside at all. And only for the second time does he travel outside of Seoul because he's sick. And the doctor says, you need to go to the countryside. You need to have fresh air. You need to have clean water. And he goes to the countryside. He writes an essay called Sanchonyedo, which I have translated as lingering impressions of a mountain village. So he goes to this mountain village and he talks about his impressions. Next. Next. Yeah. If you read these, I'll go very quickly. These are direct excerpts from this essay about rural Korea. Townspeople, these are Koreans. Like those from, sorry about that, I think this broke up in the email, sorry. Townspeople like those from a folktale gather upon straw mats laid out in the yard. Are they the least bit different from a bunch of North Pole penguins tilting their head before a gallop of ground? So he's talking about these Koreans like animals, like penguins. They don't know anything. Like this. Next, in Ponte, which is a later essay about the same experience, he says, I find it truly unsightly when monkeys imitate humans. He's talking about little Korean kids as monkeys. It's very weird, right? So he knows he's Korean, so it's not racism, it's a kind of elitism of the city versus the country, and he's calling them penguins and monkeys, they don't know anything, they're just copying me. So it's pretty intense. The next, so finally, here, in mid-October, he writes Chunhakir, which I've translated for those of you who have Chinese, Miscellaneous Writings by Autumn Lamplight. And in this, he has 5 essays. It's a multi-part essay. It's published in the Meishinbo, which is the Japanese government newspaper, but it's published all in Korean. And if you go to the next one, he gets married finally. He had all these affairs with, he's saying, sort of bar girls or entertainers. He finally gets married to this respectable woman, moves to Tokyo. Next, that's her. She looks very respectable, schoolgirl. Next, good. The first one is Chuseok Sapa, which I translate as Chuseok episode, Gugyong, Ye, Hyo, and Chilsu. So he has these 5 essays, and those should be the same in Japanese, right? I'm sure the characters are the same in Japanese. Yeah. And these are all mostly about Korea. This is a traditional essay about Korea when he's remembering his uncle who passed away. This is him talking about visiting a factory because he was an architect and the students would visit these factories. This is about visiting a cafe and the etiquette and lack of etiquette. This is visiting a hospital. So it's all these modern things, a modern factory, modern hospital, modern cafe. The final one is Chilsu, which could be mistake. But if you look at the actual essay, it's mistakes. He's talking about several mistakes. And what's very, very interesting about this is, remember, he writes this in Meishinbo, which is a Japanese government newspaper. And he's talking about mistakes of the Japanese government. It's actually very dangerous and very brave. Okay? So next. Next. I don't have time. Next. I don't know. So Chilsu is the final installment in the series. Government newspaper, mistakes. I think we're being cut off here. I don't remember. Anyway, okay, here. This is his essay, translated into English by me. They say that up until only a few years ago, there was a rickshaw, that is to say, human-powered carriages in front of Tokyo Station. When the luxury liners carrying groups of foreign tourists, so it's Japan and foreigners and Korea and foreigners. This is very important. Foreign tourists arrive. They say you could see a grand procession of rickshaws heading for the Imperial Hotel. They once, that means rickshaws once, represented a commendable etiquette. And remember his other essay was called Etiquette. In entertaining strangers from afar. But today, in receiving these precious guests who scatter dollars, and he says dollars, so it's Americans really, in their wake, they say that rickshaws have been discontinued. This is Tokyo. And in their place are used common, in their case, their meaning Japan, in their case, ultra common automobiles. So he's saying, in the past, Japan used rickshaws for foreigners, and now only automobiles. Okay, guys? 5 minutes good. So you can skip this. Here's some rickshaws, skip this. Here's the Imperial Hotel, which is a real hotel designed by American architect FRANKL. Next. There it is again, Imperial Hotel. Okay, several days ago, this is back in Seoul. Several days ago, I witnessed 3 rickshaws weaving through the narrow and bustling streets of Honmachi. This is Chunguro, basically, Chunguro Myeongdo area. It goes without saying that there were rickshaws carrying a white, middle-aged husband and wife, and a rickshaw carrying a guy exclusively employed by the hotel. They were jabbering on in a national language to go at our citizens, meaning Unishimen means Koreans, not Japanese. Surely could not help but fail to understand, while also occasionally laughing with something bordering on derision, and lifting their canes to point in a certain direction. Next. Yeah. Based on my limited knowledge of the standards of etiquette, getting the third time, etiquette, over there saying this habit of pointing represents a matter rare for Paul. Well then, since this is a man with enough standing to tour the world, he must certainly be a gentleman. And that is the case. If that is the case, it appears that this gentleman and this lady sitting atop their rickshaws have no qualms about acting rudely towards these unfamiliar streets and citizens of Korea. We don't need to observe it. And next, this is Honmachi. Honmachi, this is Japanese sign for a Korean neighborhood at the time. Good. Honmachi, again, very bustling, prosperous neighborhood in downtown Seoul. Next, this is the hotel he's talking about, Honmachi Hotel. Next, good. Here it is. Here's the finish. Isan himself. I was suddenly gripped by an unspeakably unpleasant emotion, and had I been able to do as I pleased, would have first liked to have battered the driver, Korean driver, who was so submissively held the rickshaw's handles, after which I would have used force to discipline that impertinent couple. So he keeps going between, etiquette and lack of etiquette. Yeah, next. Here he talks about how this would be actually embarrassing for Korea. Right? Next, I'm running out of time. Here is the end of the essay. Attracting the largest possible number of foreign tour groups does represent one of our duties as the masters of this land. Koreans are still masters of Korea, even though Japan is controlling it politically. While receiving them, those foreign tourists, with etiquette of humility and hospitality, so that the impression of this land, Korea, its people, Korean people, stays with them, foreigners, till the end is also a duty we Koreans must fulfill. But taking humility too far, we Koreans cannot countenance those foreigners' arrogance and contempt. Enduring this in silence is also greatly transparent and masters to mention about. And the final one, next. Next. Here's another rickshaw next. This is what he doesn't like. He thinks rickshaws look primitive. And the Japanese don't use them anymore, but they make the Koreans, right? Next. And here's a big fat Westerner, rickshaw driver. Next. And this is it. This is the end. It would be proper for the state, that's Japan now, that is Japan, to institute laws forbidding those foreigners to ride in rickshaws even in the remote areas. When they, foreigners, arrive at the pure station, we Koreans must directly and indirectly display the dignity of this land. In this regard, first taking them to their lodgings in rickshaws could not be more disgraceful. Isn't it only right that we be spared from viewing this revolting procession of rickshaws not only on the streets of Tokyo, but on those of Seoul as well? And finally, I think, mistakes. Here's the mistakes, right? I'll just start here. This, however, regardless of what the stranger, this is a foreigner, did, was wrong. And so rather than merely agonizing over attracting groups of tourists, the Tourist Bureau, this is Japanese government bureau, Tourist Bureau must also devote its attention to a variety of internal conditions, the problems in Korea, in order to forestall these sorts of mistakes. So he's in a Japanese government newspaper saying that the Japanese government is making mistakes and it's harming Korea. So this is actually quite interesting. In those earlier essays, he's like, oh, they're Korean, but they're not like. He doesn't say we. It's like I and they. Those country Koreans and I. But when he's faced with this racism from foreigners, and when he's faced with discrimination from the Japanese government, he begins, through tourism in this case, he begins to say we for Koreans and object in that kind of collectivist way. And this is the only time in all of his writings and all of his essays that I've seen Isan use this we. And so it was very interesting for me, and I wanted to examine it. And I hope I only went over by a few seconds, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor FRANKL. And now we will have the recording of Professor Andrew Sanguini's presentation.
Hello, my name is Andy Lee, and I'm a PhD student in the Film and Media Studies program at the University of Pittsburgh, which is in Pennsylvania. I apologize for not being able to attend in person due to a scheduling conflict, because I have some uh, unexpected, um, you know, um, academic commitments. However, I hope that this recorded presentation will make up for my absence. So, and I love to visit there in person. I never been to the Philippines, but I heard it was pretty beautiful. Um, so I'll love to go there one day. Um, so to give you a brief overview of my research interests, I'm actually working on my dissertation, focusing on the film culture of colonial Korea and modern Japan. But this presentation is not that. It's actually a side project of mine, which I'm hoping to publish soon. So you could kind of see that I'm really deeply interested in horror cinema, especially in the context of East Asia. So without further ado, let me begin my presentation. I'll be on Zoom during the open forum for Q&A. I look forward to your thoughts. And of course, yeah, so let me get started. Um, okay, so this is the title here is kind of changed because my original title focused on the subversive gaze in film, um, that I'm presenting. However, I kind of read additional secondary sources, and I found some really useful, very helpful concept, such as like concept of care, which helped me better understand the film, uh, very insightfully. So, uh, i- anyways, so Whispering Quarters, which is a 1998 Korean horror film, blends whodunit mystery thriller with a chilling narrative set in an all-girls high school. The mysterious death of a teacher unravels dark secrets that intertwine past and present. Through its exploration of Korean education system and themes of abuse and friendship, this story follows a vengeful ghost haunting the school. And when I revisited this film, there's this climactic scene towards the end, which deeply resonated with me. It sets at a night in a classroom. Jinju, the ghost of the high school girl who met an untimely death 8 years prior, is on a vengeful rampage. She is about to take the life of her best friend and current teacher, Eunyoung, who failed to support her during the most vulnerable moments. And there's another character named Jio, uh, a new friend of Jinju, intervenes bravely, um, tried to stop Jinju from killing Eunyoung, and she's threatening to end her own life if Jinju continues to attack. This heartfelt act unsettles Jinju, as Chio is genuinely her friend, someone who has pretended to be a living student just to connect with her. The scene culminates in tears, and Jinju experiences a transformative moment of acceptance. No longer feeling alone, she decides to relinquish her haunting, her expression softening from dread to a semblance of peace. Eunyoung and Chio watch as Jinju fades away, her final words echoing poignantly. um, I'm sorry, we'll never forget about you, which is a very important word in the film and for this paper. So this scene epitomizes what sets Korean horror apart. Unlike the spectacle heavy shocks of American horror films, or the existential dread and despair of Japanese horror, Whispering Quarters integrates melodrama and sentimentality into its horror framework. The climax emotional resonance stems from its intimate portrayal of empathy and connection, even with the supernatural. These this raises a key question: why does this fusion of melodrama, empathy, and horror resonate so deeply in Korea's first modern horror film, blending terror with heartfelt relationships? The film carves out a distinct space in the global horror landscape, offering a deeply human lens through which we view the supernatural. Um, so this film was released after the 1997 Asian final crisis, The film somewhat captures the societal precarity and critiques of um, neoliberalism's dehumanizing effects. Um, and the high school setting serves as a metaphor depicting students as future workers molded by strict oppressive systems. Teachers demand perfection, punish failure, and erode individuality, all mirroring the pressures of capitalist conformity. As horror scholar Adam Lowenstein observes, horror uses allegory to explore societal fears. Whispering Quarters does this through its portrayal of fractured solidarity between friends and and students and institutional pressures. By weaving these critiques into a relatable school environment, this, the film transforms horror into a poignant reflection of anxieties of Korean student life, offering both a chilling narrative and a sharp social commentary. So in the film, the recurring motif of friendship and fractured by school competition symbolizes the intense pressures of Korea's education system and its broader societal implications. The high school setting becomes a perfect stage for horror, amplifying the vulnerability of students navigating power imbalances, marginalization, and systematic precarity. Um, in an edited volume of Korean horror cinema, there's a chapter written by a scholar, Chiun Shin, entitled Death Bell and High School Horror. And in that chapter, Chiun Shin argues that the school setting functions as a site of horror in Death Bell, which was released in 2008, because it mirrors anxieties surrounding South Korea's high pressure education system and its potential for corrosion and ultimately explosion. So the chapter contends that the school setting is particularly effective for horror because it represents a place where young people are supposed to feel safe and secure. When this sense of safety is violated, as it is in Death Bell, where students who fail the exam are hunted down and killed, the result is a powerful atmosphere of fear and vulnerability. So despite its the grim depiction of neoliberalism, Whispering Quarter's climax offers a rare glimmer of hope through care and remembrance. The scene suggests that relationships fractured by systematic pressures can be mended, as seen in the female student's remorse and reconciliation with their deceased friend Shinju. Korean film scholar Janie Choi notes that in the Whispering Quarters series, she says, what needs to be protected is friendship, not kinship in the series. And this idea is elevated here. Friendship is not only rediscovered, but sustained through acts of communal care. And scholars of care like Joan Toronto and Carol Gilligan illuminate this theme further, framing care as a fundamental practice of resistance against neoliberalism's commodification of relationships and emphasizing mutual support over isolation. The relationship between Jinju and Eunyoung is the first section of my presentation, and it exemplifies what it says so far. Through evocative flashbacks in the film, we see their bond symbolized by the shared bell, gradually sustained by the rigid school system and the manipulative old fox. She's a disciplinarian figure, and old fox enforces conformity through harsh punishment and exploits her authority to isolate Jinju, labeling her an outcast and severing her friendship with Eunyoung. This abuse of power highlights how institutional hierarchies fracture relationships, turning friends into rivals or outcasts. Jinju, struggling to fit in as the daughter of a shaman, becomes target for old fox cruelty, culminating in a deeply symbolic scar on her hand. And literal scar too. Meanwhile, Eunyoung, favored by old fox for academic potential, is coerced into betraying her friend, further illustrating the system's corrosive influence on solidarity. There's a pivotal flashback in the film which reveals Jinju's tragic death, crushed by a statue in the school's art studio after enduring bullying for being perceived as weird and different. Her death haunts Eunyoung, who was absent during Jinju's darkest moments, and she carries the weight of unresolved guilt. Years later, Eunyoung returns to the school as the teacher, but the oppressive dynamics of the institution remain unchanged. Through recurring flashbacks, the audience witnesses the duality of their friendship, moments of warmth juxtaposed with betrayal, deepening the emotional impact of Eunyoung's memory. Going back to the climax scene, what I described in the beginning, these tensions reach their peak. Jinju, now a ghost, nearly kills Eunyoung in their old classroom. Her vengeance fueled by the volatility of fractured friendships. Supernatural elements amplify the unresolved pain between them, but Jio, who's a Jinju's new friend, intervenes, urging Jinju to reconsider her action. Jio's care and Eunyoung's promise to honor Jinju's memory prompt an emotional transformation. Jinju lets go of her vengeful intentions, symbolized by dropping her weapon, sharp weapon, and finds solace in the love and sympathy extended to her. The film concludes with Jinju departing peacefully, her memory preserved through acts of care and remembrance, offering a poignant resolution to the cycle of guilt and alienation that permeate the story. Next, the relationship between the characters Soyoung and Cheong-suk delves into the destructive effect of competition and the theme of remembrance. Initially presented as rivals, their deeper bond is revealed only after Cheong-suk's suicide, when Soyoung admits they were once best friends. This revelation underscores how the hyper-competitive school environment twisted their relationship into animosity. Cheong-suk, depicted with a piercing, stoic, and expressionless demeanor, bordering on the monstrous feminine trope, dedicates herself entirely to studying but consistently ranks second. Her frustration intensifies when teachers belittle her effort, contrasting her relentless work ethic with Soyoung's top-ranking status. Their rivalry escalates in a heated confrontation in our classroom, where Cheong-suk strikes a nerve by mentioning Soyoung's mother's mental illness. Soyoung retaliates, slapping Cheong-suk, and declares their reconcilable differences and basically ends their friendship forever. The pressure to compete, combined with their inability to surpass Soyoung despite her dedication, drives Cheong-suk to despair, culminating in her suicide. After her death, Soyoung breaks down in the library, confessing to Eunyoung, "I didn't know that it would turn out to be this bad." Her grief highlights the toll of competition, transforming close friendship into irreparable rifts. The film leaves an unsettling ambiguity. Will Cheong-suk's ghost seek revenge, or might their relationship find resolution in death? Cheong-suk actually reappears in the end as a ghost, which is a spoiler. This narrative, or their relationship, highlights the corrosive impact of institutional pressures on community solidarity. Through melodrama, Soyoung's tears signify a longing for innocence of their pre-competition friendship, evoking a space of connection untainted by rivalry. So although this space is not visually depicted, it resonates through Soyoung's grief and dialogue, grounding her mourning in the memory of what was lost. Thematically, Soyoung's act of remembering Cheong-suk subtly resists neoliberalism's isolating structures. Her grief becomes a metaphor for how hyper-competitive environments fracture solidarity, whether in schools or broader societal contexts. By portraying care and remembrance as acts of defiance, the film critiques the systems that pit individuals against each other, fracturing relationships and eroding community. I'd like to move to another section called individualism. So in the film, the high school setting becomes a suffocating space where systematic pressures erase individuality and enforce rigid conformity. Students face authoritarian teachers, competitive academic demands, and peer conflicts, which collectively stifle personal growth and self-expression. The film critiques this erasure of uniqueness, contrasting it with the burgeoning individualism in 1990s Korean youth culture. Um, a lot of scholars saw this era as a rise of cultural phenomena uh, like proto version of K-pop, exemplifies Sotaeji and the Boys, which challenged traditional values and celebrated self-expression. However, this individualism coexisted with immense societal pressures, such as the relentless drive for academic success. So the film reflects this tension, portraying high school space as a spaces where individuality is sacrificed to meet societal norms, as seen in Soyoung's aspiration for Seoul National University, which is her goal shaped more by expectation than personal desire. So Whispering Corridors highlights the struggle to preserve a self-identity within systems designed to suppress it, offering a subtle critique of neoliberal conformity disguised as individualism. Geo, the central figure in the film, embodies individuality and resistance to conformity. Her rebellious spirit is symbolized in her first appearance walking to school with earphones blasting on mainstream rock music, which is a nod to 1990s youth rebellion. Geo's creative pursuits, such as painting in an abandoned art room, mark her as a stark contrast to the rigidly conformist school environment. This self-defined space becomes her refuge and a site of resistance where she engages in unconventional activities like summoning spirit through art. Um, so, Gio's eccentricity is further highlighted when she paints a disturbing portrait of Old Fox, um, enraging a toxic male teacher and even shocking Jinju, who is the ghost who actually killed Old Fox. And Gio's masculine demeanor and protective actions, such as shielding Jinju from trauma after Old Fox's death, um, who was like hung outside of school, her role as both an outlier and a defiant protector. So her unique blend of creativity, defiance, and care exemplifies the film's broader critique of conformity and celebration of individuality. Right. Um, so Ginger's ghost embodies conformity, reflecting her longing to belong and be accepted as a normal student, despite her spectral form. Unlike typical horror monsters that demand visibility, Jinjus seek to remain unnoticed, blending into the crowd to protect her secret of being a ghost. Her poignant dialogue with Eunyoung reveals this desire, as she insists that she could merely fill a desk in the classroom without disturbing anyone. However, her journey evolves from conformity to self-awareness during the climactic confrontation, which I described earlier, where Chio's plea for her to abandon violence inspired Jinju's transformation. So, her departure, marked by a haunting rain of blood that you see here on the screen, symbolizes the failure of forced conformity within Korean schools and society. This imagery that you see right here, paired with a melancholic soundtrack, reclaims the classroom as a space of rebellion against oppressive structure. The blood-streaked portrait of Simsaingdang and the school motto, which says "Live according to one's place," underscore the critique of rigid gender roles and enforced uniformity. Um, Jinju's dramatic final act asserts individuality through the blood while connecting to collective care, as her friend's remembrance anchors her identity in community. In contrast to neoliberal individualism, which isolates through competition and self-interest, Whispering Quarters envision an alternative rooted in care and solidarity. Um, Geo support and the character's collective resistance highlights the relational model of individualism that fosters mutual growth and emotional connection. The film thus critiques isolating system that while championing the communal ethic of care as a means to reclaim agency and identity. And I think I just ran out of time. That's my 20 minutes. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to cover my last section of my presentation, which is on, focusing on the subversive gaze, the title, central theme of my talk, and also, is also in the title. But however, I promised to address that during my open forum for Q&A. Anyways, I'll talk more about that if you have any questions about subversive gaze aspect. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking with you during the forum.
Thank you for the presentation. May I now call on Professor Ingrid Jesus.
Good afternoon. So this afternoon I'll be speaking on the importance of Hangang's The Vegetarian as a piece of feminist literature, which is practically a book review done in or a book review through a philosophical lens. So, actually this paper is, I wrote this paper for a seminar in feminist philosophy. I wrote this paper for a MA class seminar in feminist philosophy. So I call this one of my favorite papers that I've written. Anyway, so feminism as an ideology and movement is both postmodern and post-structuralist, meaning it challenges grand narratives and universal truths through deconstructing or through the deconstruction of language and the instability of meaning, exploring the relationship between power structures and knowledge generation. Throughout the different waves of feminism, although there's no single definition, and each wave of feminism represents a specific socio-political period where feminist activists confronted a unique set of issues and opportunities. The feminist goal has consistently been about addressing gender discrimination and bringing about gender equality. For American philosopher and feminist theorist Drusilla Purnell, feminism calls for an ongoing ethical dialogue with society, reimagining laws, politics, and cultural norms, not just to secure legal rights, but to fundamentally transform the conditions under which individuals live. This transformative vision is intertwined with Purnell's critical theory and deconstruction, which enable a rethinking of sexual difference and power structures without being confined to essentialist or reductive definitions to create more inclusive and imaginative futures, possibilities, and opportunities. So Cornell claims that there is a lack of symbolization for the feminine within sexual difference. That is, there is no place for woman in the current symbolic order because it is presented within the parameters set by a masculine symbolic. and that what we know about woman and feminine is informed by fundamentally and essentially a negative dialectic. That a woman is not a man. Negative dialectic, not something. Right? So, what we know of womanhood and femininity is framed within phallocentric and phallocentric and masculine lenses and perspectives. Okay, so within the constraints of the current symbolic order informed by phallocentrism and heteronormativity, there are inflections of sexual stereotypes in the definitions of femininity. Stereotypes that set the masculine symbolic as the basis for the philosophical defense of the limits of language, which then limits our system of meaning, including a theory of justice and of gender identity. To be feminine, then, is to adhere to standards of meaning set by the masculine symbolic. And to be a woman, therefore, is to participate in forms of life approved by men. Next one, please. By pointing this out, Colonial demonstrates how limited the notion of woman and women are in the phallocentric symbolic order. This therefore demands a re-symbolization and re-evaluation of the feminine sex. Next slide, please. Okay. So Colonial's feminism therefore demands an unleashing of the feminine imaginary and identity by negotiating and discovering possibilities of change and confronting the limits imposed upon women. Next slide, please. So I argue, therefore, that this reimagining and resymbolization, or the re-evaluation presented, or in the way that Colonial would like it to be, or in the method of Colonial, is exemplified, excuse me. This resymbolization and re-evaluation of Colonial is exemplified by and in Handang's The Vegetarian, which follows the story of Yonghe, a woman who, through her voluntary decision to change her diet and lifestyle, challenges and defies the expectations deeply rooted in Korean society's patriarchal ideologies and specifically defined gender roles. Yonghe's vegetarianism, as the novel unfolds, reimagines the limitations of how woman can, should, and ought to be. Handang's The Vegetarian, as I would like to propose, gives us a demonstration of Colonial's ideas, as well as the implications that come with the deconstruction and reconstruction of the concept of woman and the feminine symbolic. Next slide, please. So Handang's The Vegetarian presents Yonghe as what Colonial describes as the subject who is always a subject for the other. Yonghe is never the I subject, only a subject matter for or of the narrations in the novel. Written as a 3-part novel, the main narrators for each part is not Yonghe herself, but the people around her. Her husband, her brother-in-law, and her younger sister, Inye. Meanwhile, Yonghe's point of view is scattered throughout the novel, stylized in italic font, often in cryptic and perplexing statements. This shows that Yonghe's vegetarianism is not seen as a decision out of her own agency and volition, but taken instead as a puzzle that these other characters are grappling with. an irrational and unreasonable problem that they need to make sense of and are deeply trying to solve. Or desperately trying to solve. So even reaching to the point of resorting to violence. So next slide please. So in the following slides, I include here some passages that really show the ways that these characters around Yonghe, how they're trying to solve her vegetarianism. And the first part, narrated by narrated by her husband. You can see, we can read here the very violent ways that they resort to or they use to forcefully feed Yonghe meat again. So, next slide please. So here, you can read the highlighted part. Very violent, depicting a very violent scene, just for them to feed Yonghe meat again. Next slide, please. And this is what I mentioned earlier about Yonghe's point of view that is scattered throughout the novel, stylized in italics. And if you read through, if you read the highlighted parts, maybe I chose the wrong color of highlight. But if you, these highlighted sections are very cryptic, very, perplexing statements. Next slide. So, adamantly standing by her vegetarianism, and challenging what it means to be reasonable and rational, and along with it, reconstructs the feminine symbolic and the phallocentric fantasy that has long been influencing it. No? So that is what Yonghe's vegetarianism did. No? Standing by her decision to be vegetarian, it challenges, again, what it means to be reasonable and rational, and it reconstructs the feminine symbolic and the male fantasy that influences it. So as Yonghe transforms her body and deconstructs her womanhood and personhood, she creates ripples that reach and cut through the meanings and expressions of the feminine for other people, changing and reconstructing their perception of her and her being as a woman. Next slide, please. Yonghe's brother-in-law was able to deconstruct and reconstruct an understanding of the female body and the woman with it, breaking away from the phallocentric fantasies of sex. This part or this passage is taken from the part 2 of the book, from the perspective of Yonghe's brother-in-law. So the brother-in-law again was able to deconstruct and reconstruct an understanding of the female body, breaking away from the phallocentric fantasies of sex. There is no crass nor carnal in the feminine flesh. There was nothing at all sexual about it. It was more vegetal, relating to something that exists and something that is alive. So let me just read some of my highlights. Can you hear me without the mic? Thank you. This last paragraph. This was the body of a beautiful young woman, conventionally an object of desire, and yet it was a body from which all desire had been eliminated. but this was nothing so crass as carnal desire, not for her. Rather, or so it seemed, what she had renounced was the very life that her body represented. And again, what was the life that the female body represented? A life of, systematically and historically being oppressed. So that was, so again, in this part of the book, although we are seeing Yonghae still in the lens or through the eyes of a man, her brother-in-law, the brother-in-law was able to deconstruct and reconstruct an idea of the female body and the woman that has that body. Right. Next slide, please. Thank you. Meanwhile, the ripples of Yonghae's resistance reached her sister Inhin as an awakening. So this last part of the vegetarian is the only female narrated part. So the last part, through the point of view of her younger sister. So Yonghae's resistance, or through her vegetarianism, reached her sister as an awakening. Yonghae showed her sister what freedom is, as well as how her sister and herself have been limited and trapped all along. As women, their lives is no more than a constant state of enduring that they have never actually lived on their own terms. Next slide. So, reading Hangang's The Vegetarian a la Cornell, Yonghae's vegetarianism is what Cornell understands as consciousness raising, an attempt to reimagine and re-symbolize the feminine within sexual difference so as to break the bonds of the meanings of woman that have been taken for granted and that have been justifiable as faith. Next slide, please. Interpreting Han Kang's prose through Cornell's critical theory and feminist philosophy, Yonghae had simply let fall the slender thread that had kept her connected with everyday life. Everyday life that is for Cornell is a reality shaped by unconscious fantasies that severely restrict our field of vision and our political imagination. Unconscious fantasies that give the body to the gender hierarchy. Although Inye's first reaction, although Inye's first reaction is that she was unable to forgive Yonghae for crossing over boundaries that she herself could not bring herself to cross, for shaking off social constraints and leaving her behind, Inye nonetheless recognized that Yonghae's resistance and liberation from convention implies a concept of liberation that would have implications for us all. That is, for all women, herself included. As a catalyst for consciousness raising, before Yonghae had broken those bars, or that is, before Yonghae pushed back against the limits, the constraints, and the expectations that come with norms and societal conventions, Inye would have never known that they were there. And that if Yonghae hadn't smashed through all the boundaries, if everything hadn't splintered apart, then perhaps Inye was the one who would have broken down. So ultimately, Han Kang's The Vegetarian embodies Cornell's feminism. The novel gives something tangible to Cornell's claim that it is a serious mistake to identify what has come to be known as deconstruction with irrationalism. So, although they did not understand Yonghae, and even the readers, when I was reading this, I did not really understand what her motivations are, because again, her point of view, her POV throughout the novel is again very cryptic, very perplexing, right? I, as a reader, as when I first read it, I did not grasp it like immediately. Not until I read The Vegetarian and Cornell side by side. So this is what Yongya was trying to do, to reconstruct, to deconstruct and reconstruct what it means to be a woman for her and also for other people around her. Next, right. So in the end, Handang's The Vegetarian and Cornell's Feminism both show that knowing the limit opens up an endless horizon, and as feminists, as women, we have every reason to push back against and to push beyond, these limitations and boundaries set and imposed upon us by society and our current form of life. This pushback is precisely the manifestation of our reimagination and reconstruction of the concept of woman and femininity. The brave, postmodern, and post-structuralist feminist attempt to elucidate and unravel new possibilities for the elaboration of the feminine experience. The experience of what it looks, feels, and what it is to be woman. And so that's all that I have for you this afternoon. Again, I'm Ingrid from the Department of Philosophy. Thank you for listening. 바로 여기까지는 유비 철학 강사가 도인경이었습니다. 감사합니다.
We are now open to receiving your questions. So, yes, please introduce yourself. Where is the mic?
Hello. Good afternoon po. My name is Sergio Melisa. I am a Filipino and Arabic Filipino teacher from Laguna. Dito po. And first of all, thank you very much po for that very interesting talk about Korean literature. I'm very interested, especially with Hamkam, knowing that she won the Nobel Prize for Literature. So my question po is for all three speakers. For a bit of context, especially to our foreign speakers, the K-12 curriculum in the Philippines states that Korean and Japanese literature or Asian literature is being taught to grade 8 students in English and grade 9 students in Filipino. So my question po will be, what will be your advice to Filipino teachers who want to use want to teach the material that you have studied and take it, contextualize it in the Philippine context? So let's say, for example, on the case of Miss Ingrid, if I were going to teach the vegetarian, how will I going to contextualize it in the Philippine context to teach it to my students? By the way, grade 8 students are 13 to 14 years old, while grade 9 students are 14 to 15 years old. Thank you very much.
So, firstly, I will not teach the vegetarian to 13 and 14-year-old students because, although, again, I talked about, again, how we can define our identity, especially for little girls. How can they define their femininity, their womanhood, and also their personhood? However, although that is important in their age and how their developmental stage, I will not teach the vegetarian to that young students of that age, because if not R18, talagang ano siya, R% right? So, but for other, since meron tayong A-pop booth sa labas, so I think other literature are better suited for those students of that age given their developmental level. Since again, they're still very impressionable. And the gender violence, not just the physical violence depicted in the vegetarian is again, I don't want to traumatize them that early.
Thank you.
So thank you. It's a wonderful question. I think I would approach it historically, as I briefly mentioned. There are these overlaps between Isang writing as a Korean under Japanese colonial rule, and the Philippines has that shared history. But even in trying to explore how to not violate the laws and be thrown in jail, which a lot of Koreans were, but still tell the truth and still talk about mistakes and problems with the colonial rule constructively. And then in the present, here we are in the Philippines, and it's already bilingual. It's already somewhat bicultural, and I think Isang, then, the way all of you are now, is trying to navigate between his identity as a Korean and his more cosmopolitan identity, cultural and linguistically. And so I think that's a good thing to teach, unlike coming out as early as possible, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Can we hear from
Is there?
Yeah, the same question raised by him. He requested all the panelists to answer his question. Oh, okay.
I'll repeat the question. Good afternoon, Sir. Again, my question is, what would be your advice to Filipino teachers who want to use whispering corridors to teach in the Philippine context? Want to use whispering corridors and teach whispering corridors and teach
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I follow the text in the chat. Okay. So the question is, what would be your advice for Filipino teachers wanting to use the film and teaching in different context? I think that I would say that the film is actually it's a great example of the film that sort of like reflects like social issues, even though it's kind of like the film kind of takes place like around like 25 to 30 years ago, that takes place in the 90s. But I think it kind of shows like how it could show like this worst side of things in education, and show how things are really not doing really well, not just in society general, but also like how it kind of shows kind of a reflection of what school was like in terms of like this native side. So maybe it could kind of show like a glimpse of like the bad side of society at the same time how to like kind of overcome that. And maybe I could recommend this film in like maybe first like Korean cinema and society or introduction to Korean culture through film. And I think it would kind of stand well with other films that kind of consider canon as a reflection of the society and how they're kind of shaped by things. I don't know if I have answered your question, but I think it's a great film, in my opinion. And the sequel is also great in terms of showing the queer culture in Korea and how it's also like one of the first attempt to show like queer representation in Korea as well. Like the sequel kind of.
Thank you. And do we have any other questions for our panelists? Anyone? Yes, please. The lady in red.
Hi, I'm Jess Rombawa from the Department of Communication Research here in UP. This is for Dr. FRANKL. You mentioned a while ago that in the language that Lee-Sang used, it seems that elitism seems to be evident. He's talking to Koreans about being like monkeys and penguins and so on. Do you, in your interpretation, do you see this as something that is because of his educational background, or is it something cultural because of well, there's him being in a certain time period? And do you also see that this such elitism is something that transcended from his time and is still happening in in society, or even in the literature that is written after him?
So it's a great question, or three questions really. If I forget, you can remind me. But I think the first two questions, it's really a combination. So yes, there was elitism at the time, and there still is. And Isang considered himself and was in fact brilliant and well-educated. And like I said, he was in this Japanese school. He graduated in front of those 14 Japanese, and he didn't even apply to the government. They scouted him basically. That's how talented he was. So there is some elitism. But there's also, which was pervasive, I think, in society, and a remnant of traditional society that had strict caste roles. But there's also his own individual and idiosyncratic identity. He was very protective of his personal identity as an artist, and Koreans then and now were very into saying we and our and we and our. And he rejected that because he wanted to have an individual identity as an artist. So there's a negative aspect to it, but there's also a very positive aspect to it. And I think your third question, I think the real difference, there's two real differences. One is his own idiosyncratic and individual ability and personality. He really was a genius. And I think the word genius is overused. I think it's appropriate in his case. But secondly, I think still, among very wealthy people in Korea or among very well-educated people, there is this sentiment, but you can't say it. He was rare because he actually said it and wrote it down.
Okay, does anyone have a question for Professor Jesus? Professor Mr. D? Okay, so we're given only 2 minutes more, so let me ask my question. So, to Professor Jesus, in relation to Korea being a patriarchal society, as mentioned in your presentation, after Hang received the Nobel Prize for Literature last year, being the first Asian woman to receive such a prestigious award, is there a dramatic or significant change in the regard for female Korean authors? Are they more respected now than before? Or is it too early to say?
I would like to hope that there's a higher like sense of respect and admiration for women in general, not just professional women but are professionals. But in my research, we have to understand that when you say feminism in Korea, most of the public will receive it as the first wave feminism, like anti-men ideology. So, although now we are in the fourth or fifth wave feminism, which again transcended its gender limitations, now it's more cosmopolitan than heavily gendered. But again, pushing for like gender equality, equity, and all those things. No? But it's more open now. Feminist theory now is more open, more cosmopolitan. But the way feminism is received in Korea at present, I would say, based on my readings of it, they are still stuck in the first and second wave. There is a delay in the reception. They still think that a feminist, or anyone reading feminist literature, is again anti-men, misandry.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Now, we were given 2 minutes to hear from Professor Andrew Lee. So can we maybe request you to say a little about the subversive gaze, which you said you missed out during the presentation because you ran out of time. Would that be possible?
Hello, can you hear me? Right,
Yes.
so about this slide, I just want to say that I was trying to like complicate the horror view that's kind of famous with the word scholarship, and what they say is that it was based on like the classic feminist theories and film studies is that like women traditionally like old Hollywood movies, like women are like portrayed as passive characters to serve like characters within the patriarchal structure of the storytelling, and it's to a certain extent of society. And whenever like women works, they were kind of challenges like the characters and male characters and all that, that they become like punished or become a victim. And so when you bring that to the film, when the woman kind of look at monsters, they actually represents some kind of huge creature, because monster also kind of represents like biological anomalies as well as sexual threat, which kind of scares a lot of male characters, but also by the same time kind of brings a sympathy or empathy from female characters because they share a similar sort of like oppression, right? But I think most importers kind of complicates that that aspect by showing us that not only it kind of shows us like sexual differences or threat, but also from the gaze we're looking, after looking, most important sort of like it becomes an act of accusation or act of care, right? So it's sort of like with normal Hollywood films about American horror films, they'll kind of like make women an object, whereas like it was important to rehumanize the ghost, right? So the ghost becomes not a monstrous version of femininity, but she's like a product of the monstrous system here back in the 20s. And also there's like this sense of like a female solidarity that's also kind of wants with like the female characters and monster relationship. I think that's typical of them. So it also kind of becomes this sort of act of survival, remembering, honoring the lost friends, and more recognizing the character of the ties. That kind of becomes like a unique intervention within the course of this college. That's one front say the third section, which I haven't got time to go. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you so much. Let us give a round of applause to our three presenters. And are we going to award the certificate now? Okay, so let me. So let me give the certificate of appreciation to Professor Dan FRANKL for his presentation. And then, of course, to Professor Ingrid Middleton. This way.
Right.